Well, this video was posted now almost a year ago, but I imagine it generates a lot of activity, so I felt like contributing my sad little story here and just sort of getting it out there and sharing with the world and perhaps some people that I know who don't know my deconversion story. I'd have to say that before my deconversion, I definitely sensed that there was a problem between me and religion. I definitely felt like I was losing my connectivity to not only my church but to my religion, sort of premature disillusionment, if you will. Many of you, actually I'm sure pretty much all of you, have seen or at least heard about the movie The Passion of the Christ, and I remember that my church hyped it up a lot, and we went and saw it as a group with another church, and I just remember, our youth pastors had had a chance to see it early, and they talked about what an emotional ride it was, and they felt so emotionally moved, and it was amazing, and I was thinking, this is just going to be such a life-changing film for me. But I just remember going there and sitting in the theater, and while all my Christian friends around me were, weeping and crying and what have you, I sort of felt like it was no big deal. And, maybe that's partially to blame for, all the immense desensitizing I've, received on account of, just the media and what have you. But one would think that a true Christian would have felt at least something, but frankly, sitting there watching, this man get tortured supposedly for my sins, it didn't faze me at all. And so that was when I first sensed that there was something wrong. It wasn't until many years later there were problems in my church, and to keep a long story short, what happened is a very prominent person in our church, someone who I looked up to immensely, left because she felt that the board and the minister were doing something that they had no business, that no Christian church had any business doing. And I didn't know the full story, but I definitely felt slightly betrayed. But it wasn't until quite a long while later that I realized that it was in fact the church that was to blame, and that they were in the wrong based on their own moral teachings. So I remember having a slow falling away from the church, just feeling not interested in it anymore, feeling like I had lost the passion and the pop, and I began to do and get involved in other things. So I just remember sitting there one day, and I don't know what it was I was reading, but I'd come to a question that had never before entered into my mind as a Christian. And it was the question of, is there really a God? Does God really exist? And all these questions that I had asked while I was in church came up again. Now, when I had asked these questions in church, I had just been told to leave it to faith, to leave it to, God knew what he was talking about. We humans are just the ones who don't understand. And I began to think of how incredibly self-destructive that kind of thinking was. It's like, why can't I ask these questions? Why should it just make sense? Why should I just let it be? Faith wasn't enough anymore. So I began to just do some research. I began to ask some questions. I began to read other things. I began to read the Bible again. Now, without this Christian mentality, as a completely abstract, as a completely objective reader. And even more things stopped making sense to me, and more importantly, I was losing my faith. I wanted it to appeal to me on a logical level, and it obviously that's something that religion fails at in many facets. So I remember sitting in my room one day. I was upstairs and I had my laptop on my lap. I was sitting in my bed, and the thought just sort of floated into my mind so simply but so honestly, and it stayed there ever since. And it was the thought, the fully knowledgeable thought that there is no God. And I acknowledged it to myself, and well, eventually I acknowledged it to other people, but acknowledging it to myself was actually a lot easier. But one thing you have to understand is my family was religious. My mother well, I don't know if I would define her as religious, but, she's a churchgoer, as was my grandmother. And so, my stepfather is a soldier in the U.S. Army, and so they really have this strong God bless America type mentality. And coming clean about, not believing in God anymore was rather difficult. I sort of eased them into it. I started by going agnostic, still spiritual, but then going agnostic. And I think the hardest thing about this whole deconversion story is the fact that my family, for the most part, thinks that this is just some sort of asinine phase that I'm going through, that eventually I'll get over it and eventually I'll, turn my heart back to God. But I can't imagine that ever happening. Ever. Because I made the decision to become a Christian and to be a follower of Jesus Christ. That decision was motivated by emotion. My decision to become an atheist was motivated by logic and reasoning, something that I trust far more than faith, because faith will let you down twice as much as reason and logic. But I think the reason it concerns my parents and my family so much is because, I was such a passionate Christian, and I really was that example of having a Christ-like attitude, and it really kind of makes them nervous, I think. It makes them frightened, because if someone with such an immense level of passion can fall and can be convinced that everything he believed was a lie, I think I pose a great threat to them, and I think they perceive me as a great threat to them and their beliefs. And that's kind of sad. So I think they're just sort of kind of trying to fool themselves into thinking that, it's just a phase. It's just a phase. So I don't know. I guess that's pretty much it. Nothing miraculous, nothing extravagant. I'm still having to deal with the fact that my family is religious and they don't quite acknowledge my disbelief. Actually, it's not a disbelief. It's a belief that there is no God, which is a subtle difference. There's a difference between, I can say I don't believe in Zeus, but to say that I believe that Zeus does not exist, it's a subtle difference, because it's not just acknowledging a lack of belief, it's establishing that I believe something, and that it's the absence of God. So, I don't know. I can't completely disacknowledge the existence of a being more powerful than me, because to do so would really, require an immense level of knowledge. But this becomes an issue of, what defines a God. If it's the Christian model, if it's the Muslim or the Jewish model, then no, I don't believe there is a God. I believe there is no God by that definition, because those guys are described as omnipotent. They created the universe. And I don't know. I'm getting completely off topic here. I'll post my own reasonings for why I became an atheist another time. This is slowly reaching the 9-minute mark, and I'm sure you all are tired of hearing me. So that's about it. That's my deconversion story.